Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So we're doing a seminar on chanting, and we've just concluded the benefits of chanting individually. Prabhupada, in his little advertising brochure that he took to the West, he mentioned there that the chanting should be done individually and collectively. So we've had a little taste of the individual, and now we'll look at some situations where group chanting, kirtan, that Prabhupada tried to initiate in India especially. So on January the 14th, 1976, Srila Prabhupada was in Calcutta, and he had a visit from Mrs. Lalita Bose. So she was the niece of Subhash, what's his name, Netaji Bose. So at least in Bengal, because their airport also is called Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Airport. So he's a national hero, and he happened to go to school at Scottish Churches College at the same time Prabhupada was there. I think Prabhupada was a year younger, but apparently they must have had some dealings together, at least Prabhupada seemed to indicate that. Of course, Subhash Chandra Bose went on to lead this Freedom for India campaign. He was already involved with the Congress, and but he had a different opinion about how they should go about getting their independence, and it was not welcomed by Gandhi. So when Subhash Chandra Bose was elected as the president of the Congress party, then Gandhi threatened that if you don't remove him, then I'm leaving. So because of that inner politics, they had to make him stand down. Later on, he went on to start the Indian National Army, INA. And they were actually, he had a base in Singapore. He made a pact with the Japanese. He made a pact with the Germans that any Indian that leaves the British forces, you send them to me, and I'll make an army in Singapore. And his plan was to go north around, up the Malaysian peninsula, up around Manipur, and come down into India from there. So somehow or another, they say he died in an airplane crash. But Prabhupada, because we weren't, getting involved in politics is not our thing, but it's good to know the history and the background. So in Singapore, apparently he got killed in Singapore, he got killed in an aeroplane crash. But recently, just this last year, I read in the newspaper there was some article doing a review on a new book about Netaji Bose. And the claim in that book was that he was actually killed. He didn't die in the plane crash, but he was captured. And according to the author of this book, he was actually taken to Russia, and he was put in a concentration camp there. But they knew who he was, so they didn't harm him or anything. But when they contacted the Indian government, or Indian government to be, I guess it was around the same time anyway, they told them, we have Bose here, shall we send him back? So the Indian government at the time, that was the first independence government, they said, no, just keep him where he is. Because they were afraid if he comes back into India, it's going to cause all kinds of trouble. So apparently he was kept in a concentration camp for about 5 years. Then finally the Indian government told the Russians, we don't want him, so they killed him. So at least according to that author's investigation, Subhash Chandra Bose was actually murdered by his own people, the first Indian government. Anyway, I'm not saying this is a fact, but I'm just trying to give a background who Netaji Bose was. And on this particular day, then Netaji's niece came to see Srila Prabhupada. So she was very friendly with Prabhupada. I guess they must have known each other from the school days. So she was also very close with Indira Gandhi. So Mrs. Lalita Bose, an influential woman and a good friend to the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, visited Prabhupada in mid-evening. So we were in Calcutta. She is the niece of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, an old school friend of Srila Prabhupada's, who became a national hero, especially in Bengal, during the agitation for Indian independence in the 1930s and 1940s. So he had advocated the use of force as a means to drive out the British, and he organized an independent Indian army based in Singapore during the Second World War. The intention was to march into India from the north and liberate her by driving out the British. Mysteriously, he was killed in an air crash at the end of the war. So Prabhupada told us that the real reason why the British decided to quit India was because of the increasingly violent opposition to them. It was not because of Gandhi's non-violence movement. When they understood that the police and the army were no longer willing to help, were no longer cooperative with the British, they knew then that they could not maintain their control, and so then they decided to let them have their independence. So that was the politics that was going on. That for 250 years, the Indian population were quite submissive to the British Raj. But now in the mid-1900s, then with better equipment, better communication, there was wars going on because of the Second World War. It was absorbing all the resources of the British empire, so-called empire. So they themselves came to the conclusion that when the Second World War in Europe is ended, we won't be able to keep control of India. So they knew that. So they told them, okay, you can have your independence. So that's a little snap on that. So that was the beginning of the liberation, if you like, liberation movement, real one. That the British understood now the police and the army are becoming increasingly difficult to deal with and insubordinate. So they knew if we lose control of the army, then we've lost everything. So they tried to do it in such a way that they could back out but keep some good relation, so they could keep on trading with India, because it was actually rich in resources. And that was the reason why they actually did so much work here in India, was so they could exploit the people, and they could exploit the, natural resources in various ways. So when you hear a Bengali give you the history of independent India, it's a lot different from the official version that the main government put out. Anyway, so Prabhupada knew Lalita Bose. She was very impressed with what Prabhupada had done in going to Europe and America, and coming back with what she said was an army of white Vaishnavas. So she was very talkative and loud, but she was respectful and willing to help where she could. She laughingly told Prabhupada that Netaji had organized an army to conquer India, and now Prabhupada was organizing an army of Vaishnavas to conquer the world. So she liked that. Prabhupada requested her to assist in the ongoing visa problems that his American disciples were having. which prevented them from staying in India longer than 3 or 6 months. So because practically speaking she could walk into Indira Gandhi's office anytime she liked. They were close friends. So Prabhupada agreed that she would try to help. So during their conversation, she also remarked that Mrs. Gandhi had said that she thought Srila Prabhupada was a very pure saint. Because in 1975, Prabhupada had been trying to get an interview with Indira Gandhi with the idea of getting the immigration problems solved and getting some kind of permanent entry visas for all of his disciples. So anyway, she was quite friendly. She said she would speak directly with Indira Gandhi. Prabhupada had been to Indira Gandhi's office in 1975, and he'd been trying to get an interview, but it was very difficult to get in there. Finally, he did get in. At the time when he got the message, all right, Mrs. Gandhi, we'll see you now, he was actually touring America. So he immediately stopped the tour, flew directly back to India, and then a couple of days later they went to meet with Mrs. Gandhi. So Prabhupada had Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and I think Bhavananda was there. But when Prabhupada went to her office, as he entered, they wouldn't let the American devotees in, only Prabhupada, because they were suspicious. There was a lot of palaver about whether the ISKCON devotees were actually CIA agents that had come to spy on India. So they wouldn't let the American devotees into Mrs. Gandhi's office. But another problem was that just the day before, this, what's his name, the first president of Bangladesh, Rahman, what was his name? What? It was something Rahman. Mujibur Rahman. He had been assassinated just the day before. And Indira Gandhi had already declared a lockdown on politics in India. And she had imprisoned about 1,500 of the political opposition. So there was a state of official national emergency in India. So there was a lot of paranoia. Prabhupada, when he went into Mrs. Gandhi's room, he said she was so nervous because, Raman had been killed the day before. She thought she was going to be the next one, obviously. So he said she was so nervous that he could hardly speak to her. So in the end, that, meeting that we hoped would bring so much help to us turned out to be a dud. We didn't get much help. But at least she said she would try, Lalit Bose. And she did make this comment that Mrs. Gandhi had said that she thought Prabhupada was a very great saint. So the government were unofficially with us, but of course they also had this secular policy that had such a bad experience at the time of independence. 1 million people killed, Muslims and Hindus. So they were afraid of that, so they declared that the government was, what did I just say? Secular, yes. So anyway, it was a little difficult to get any constructive thing out of her. But at least she had an appreciation that Prabhupada was a genuine saint. So behind the scenes there was giving some help. Just like this New York court case, when it came up in 1975-76, she actually, the government didn't get directly involved with that, but Mrs. Gandhi actually sent one of her aides to America to see what was going on, and he was present there in the court when they were discussing and made their findings. So she was definitely favorable to us, but she was afraid of actually doing anything out in the open. So after she left, Prabhupada called in Madhvisa and Tamal Krishna Goswami, and he asked them to organize a bus program throughout India for Sankirtan propagation and prasadam distribution Mrs. Bose's comment about Mrs. Gandhi being favourable had encouraged Prabhupada. So he told them that if this is her true mentality, a true sentiment, then we should take advantage of the favourable climate immediately. So, despite the current state of national emergency and paranoia that ISKCON is a front for the CIA, Prabhupada is certain that the Krishna Consciousness movement can actually, as he said, change the face of India. If ISKCON's leading devotees could establish large-scale programs in India for at least 1 year, he said it would be possible. So he is intent on beginning this program, and he talked animatedly about how it could be organized. So Tamal Krishna expressed some doubt about his own personal involvement because he had so many responsibilities in America. At that time he was running the Radha Damodar Travelling Sankirtan Party. That had started off with one bus, Vishnu Jan Swami and a few brahmacharis, and they used to tour around the college campuses. They'd set up an asana for Radha. They had Radha Damodar deities. They're in Gita Nagari nowadays, but in those days they were travelling with Vishnu Jan Swami. They're quite big deities as well, made of brass. So Tamal Krishna, when he came back to America after serving for 4 years in India, he joined up with Vishnu Jan Swami into the Radha Damodar Travelling Sankirtan Party, and because Tamal was very expert at organisation, and Vishnu Jan Maharaj, he was expert at bhajan and kirtan, but he wasn't a manager. So Tamal, they had actually joined ISKCON together in 1968. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj took care of the management side of things. Prabhupada had told him that it's very nice you're going to the campuses, but how many books have you distributed? So at that time book distribution was just starting to take off. So Tamal transformed the Radha Damodar Party from being just like a kirtan Indian cultural group to a book distribution oriented Sankirtan party. So within about a year, he had recruited about 120 brahmacharis from all over America. They were selling $50,000 worth of books every month, and they were growing in strength from day to day. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj was fully engaged just in running that program. So he told Prabhupada that I have responsibilities in America, so I won't be able to personally do this, but I can help. But Madhavisa Swami, however, had become unsettled in his zone, which was the South Sea zone. He'd been there in a couple of years. He was looking for some new engagement, so he immediately volunteered that he would look into trying to get some buses and start this travelling Sankirtan party. Anyway, that was Prabhupada's vision, that if we had a few men and some buses, we could go out in all directions, and within a very short time, the Indian public could be enthused by the Sankirtan movement, and he said the whole face of India will change. So anyway, at least that was the idea. So Madhavisa himself actually didn't get to the point of actually getting any buses or anything, but later on it was taken up in various ways, that idea of travelling. Lokanath Maharaj got his first bullock cart going in the late 1960s, 70s, sorry. He was doing that. And Hansadutta, as we'll learn here, he was Prabhupada's secretary for 1 month, and then he went back to the West. So he became so enthused about this village-to-village, bus party, that he bought 4 buses in Germany, and then with a group of about 50 brahmacharis, he drove them overseas and back into India, and he started this program. So Prabhupada was very pleased with that. Of course, Hansadutta was hoping that Prabhupada would join the party himself, Prabhupada, he did actually tell them that if you can get the equipment and the buses together, I'll come with you. So Hansadutta was hoping that would happen. We knew that it would never happen because Prabhupada was so physically, his body was so physically worn out by that time. Traveling on the bus party was definitely not going to happen. But, Prabhupada would say these things sometimes to enthuse the devotees and spark their energy in the right direction. So, anyway, so the idea is to propagate the Sankirtan movement, as we were doing in all of our temples in the West. Devotees would go out for several hours a day just chanting on the street. So it was growing and people became attracted because of the Maha Mantra. So when Prabhupada came to Calcutta and then Mayapur in early 1976, then Harikesh Swami was on the party. He was Prabhupada's cook. And Prabhupada gave him sannyas. So he went off to preach in Europe. And March the 7th, 1976, he sent his first correspondence to Srila Prabhupada to let him know what was going on with his service. So it was a long, detailed and ecstatic report of his recent and unexpected preaching trip to Hungary. So in those days, I don't know anybody's old enough nowadays to remember this, but there was the Iron Curtain which separated the Soviet Union from the Western countries, and of course they built the Berlin Wall, and there was a lot of friction there, and if anybody got caught, especially with religious books, then they could be thrown in jail, and they just throw away the key and let you rot in the prisons. So it was quite risky to go to these countries, but they weren't all exactly the same. Yugoslavia was kind of half communist, half capitalist. Hungary, of course, they were very religious, kind of Christian-based people there. So what had happened was Harikesh had taken sannyas, and then Prabhupada sent him to Europe. And when he arrived in London on his way through, he met one of our German devotees, Alanath, and he had just received an invitation from a yoga group in Hungary. So somebody had seen him selling books on the street in Sweden, some person from this yoga group. And so he told them, yeah, we're yoga people, we do yoga. So they invited him, we're having a function, you can come to Hungary, we'll give you an official invite, and you can show us how to do this Bhakti yoga. So he was there in London just getting ready for this trip, and Harikesh Maharaj suddenly turned up. So immediately Alanath asked him, why don't you come with me to Hungary? Otherwise it had been decided when he left Mayapur, he had talked with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada and Tamal Krishna Maharaj had arranged that he could go and join the Radha Damodar Sankirtan party and run one of the buses. So anyway, he never got that far. He got to London, he met Alanath, and practically the next day they were off in a van and they drove, over the borders into Hungary. So later on, he sent a letter to Srila Prabhupada in early March, and it was an ecstatic report of his recent and unexpected preaching trip to Hungary. He explained that when passing through London, he had met Alanath, who was just preparing to go to Hungary in response to an invitation from a yoga school. Alanath invited Harikesh along, and he gladly accepted. So they took books, pamphlets, posters, and instruments, and the two of them met with great success. Somehow or another they got in there. Harikesh told me actually they had a van full of books, and he could have been thrown in jail for the rest of his life for that. But he said when they were stopped at the border by the police, they had them open the doors so they could see what was inside the van. And all the Bhagavad Gitas was stacked there. And somehow or another, the policeman, when he was looking, he didn't see them. Just Krishna's arrangement. He was looking and looking and he didn't see anything. So he said, okay, you're okay, off you go. So they made it to, I don't know what's the capital of Hungary? Budapest. So they got into Hungary somehow or another anyway. And they immediately joined in with the program with this yoga group. Although they were highly restricted in what they could say, the Hungarians' reaction to kirtan and prasadam, he said, was extraordinary. He said, I simply engaged them in kirtan and made them all kinds of nice prasadam, which they went wild over. They'd never tasted Oliver and so many different, So he said the Hungarians like to eat a lot, and they're so poor, so they don't have much selection of food. So they never had anything as nice as prasadam. One thing that is available in Eastern Europe is milk and grains. Vegetables very difficult to get, but milk and grains were in abundance. So he said the milk products are very cheap, and this is the basis, of course, of our prasadam. So he said, I made very much and very opulently halava and puris, and a drink made from the whey of the milk. And sometimes we gave them some Simply Wonderfuls. Does everybody know what a Simply Wonderful is? That was one of the original inventions of Prabhupada's when he first went to the West. So it was very popular. All our temples used to offer the deities Simply Wonderfuls. So he'd taken his stock with him. So they loved it. They couldn't believe how anything could taste so good. So from the point of view, he said, of prasadam, then they were completely convinced. And what to speak about kirtan? He said after a short while, as they learned how to chant the Maha Mantra and play kartals, he said we started having kirtans, which to me seemed to be as good as any kirtan in any temple in the movement around the world. They chanted and danced like real madmen, and they would go on as long as I could go. So every evening we were having very raging hour-long kirtans, where at the end everybody just collapsed on the floor in ecstasy, and then we gave them prasadam. So I chanted bhajans, and they fell over each other trying to record what he was singing. So it's like, miracle practically. These people, their lives were so dull, and then suddenly they got the Maha Mantra, it completely captured them. So he said it even occurred in public, that although I always had to cover up the philosophy out of fear of being stopped and thrown out of the country, these people became so enlivened due to the ecstatic kirtans that they actually forced me to speak about Krishna, although they didn't have any idea what was the force behind the chanting. So they knew there was something. As they got a little purified, they realized this is not just simply singing and dancing, like you do in some kind of disco or something like that. They knew there's some kind of deeper purpose. They could perceive it. So Harikesh was trying to refuse to get into anything philosophical, but they actually forced him practically to speak about Krishna. They told him, now what is this? What's really going on here? So he said, I was refusing to do it. I started speaking about the soul very reluctantly, but then all of a sudden, out of my control, a Sanskrit verse, Nityam Shashvato Yam Purana, came out of my mouth, and they all jumped upon me as if half crazed, demanding to know, what was that? What was that? So they heard the Sankirtan and the Sanskrit. Wow, what's going on here? So I had to surrender and pray to Krishna for protection. So I started to explain everything to them. The translator became so excited that her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and she became so excited that she couldn't speak properly. This is the translator. So it seems that this is what they have been waiting for, because their lives are so very empty. But then they were afraid for us at the end, because what I had been saying was so revolutionary. So they had to be very, very careful. But the idea was that people, Prabhupada said, were like anybody else anywhere in the world. Actually, in the midsummer of 1976, we had gone to Washington, and I mentioned the other day that it was the 200th anniversary of American independence. So in the afternoon, the devotees invited Srila Prabhupada to go, with a little procession of vehicles from our temple in Potomac, which is up in the hills, and go down into the main area of Washington, which is the mall. And there's, many acres of open land there. That was where there was going to be this fireworks display, and they were going to distribute. They built a 200-year birthday cake for America, and the thing was like, it weighed a couple of tons apparently, and they were going to distribute that to all the millions of people that were going to come for the celebrations, except that when they health and safety people came, they declared that the cake had gone stale, so they couldn't distribute it, so the whole cake was useless. Anyway, when we went down into Washington, we were going around, there was no traffic hardly, everybody was walking, and Prabhupada had the devotees in a van in front of us doing Harinam Sankirtan. So as we kind of went down slowly down the hills into the mall, we were chanting. So as we went, as we went around, people would turn around and they would see or hear the kirtan, and they were all dancing. Yeah, even I saw when we went around one street, there were policemen everywhere. So a couple of the police were on the street corner. They saw the van, and there was actually about 10 vehicles that we had in tandem, and the cops started waving and dancing, and so it was a jubilant atmosphere. So as we drove around, Prabhupada made an unusual comment. He said, he said, just like in Russia, he said, actually, the people are very nice. They're ordinary people. It's just that the government has spoiled them. So he said, in a few years' time, 20 years, that will all be finished. He said, you cannot artificially suppress people and their natural instincts to become happy. So he made the prediction there in 76 that within 20 years the Soviet Union was going to fall. And of course it did do. By 1990 they broke up. But Prabhupada's observation was that the people here, the ordinary people of America, there's no difference between them and the ordinary people in any other country. Yeah, they're all human beings. But by politics, they've been separated by nationalism and all these things. So anyway, back to Harikesha's adventures in Hungary. So he made the comment that their lives are so very empty, but they were afraid for Harikesha and Alanath if the police inevitably would catch up with them. So they had a very, the Soviet Union, they had a very extensive spying system. And sometimes they would, I saw a movie once about Eastern Europe, and this person was like the leader of the underground. It was in East Germany, so they have like the Americans have the CIA. So in the Eastern Bloc, they had the Stasi. So they even had husbands and wives spying on each other and then reporting back to their headquarters. I mean, the whole place was simply full of people spying on everybody because they created this atmosphere of paranoia. So they were afraid that Harikesha and Alanath would get captured by the police and then either jailed or at least thrown out. So despite the restrictions for speaking, Delhi Karoli, who was the yoga instructor who had organized the programs, he said that he would still organize some outdoor kirtans for his people, and he wants the devotees to return as often as possible. So included in his letter were photos of men and women dancing with upraised arms and japa beads around their necks. There's such a demand that Harikesha said he hopes to return frequently and visit Bulgaria, Romania, and East Germany in the summer. So he asked if he should make a recording of the chanting. because he predicted that along with prasadam, it would sweep the country. So Harikesh described his experience as the most wonderful of my whole life. And he also asked Prabhupada if he should continue on with the Eastern European preaching, or should he continue on to America as the previous plan and join up with the Radha Damodar party. So Prabhupada was delighted with his report. He told me, this is needed to travel and preach and make new devotees. So after so many months of getting trained up by Prabhupada, how to defeat the Marxist philosophy, it seems that Krishna has now given Harikesh the opportunity to use it. So what had happened was that when I joined Srila Prabhupada's personal party at the end of November in 1975, Harikesh was a little he felt that he was being pushed out a little bit. He'd been cooking and doing the servant's duties, as well as doing this transcriptions of Prabhupada's tapes. And when Prabhupada made me his full-time servant, Harikesh was thinking, oh, well, now what will I do? So he was afraid he was going to get booted off the party to make way for me. Anyway, so a couple of months later he took sannyas, and then he ended up in Eastern Europe. But before he left, in December and January of 75 and 76, Prabhupada, after Harikesh had kind of lost half his duties as the servant, Prabhupada told him, don't worry, I have lots of other engagement. So he started calling Harikesh into his room every day, and they would discuss Soviet policies and Marxist philosophy, Lenin, like that. And Prabhupada was teaching him how to expose and counteract the philosophy of the Soviet Union, or the Soviet people. Their official creed was scientific materialism. That was, they used to advertise, we go on scientific materialism. So Prabhupada replied, he was happy. I have to say that when I joined the party and I saw Prabhupada, spend at least an hour a day with Harikesh talking about communist philosophy, I was thinking, well, what's the use of that? It's a locked-in place. You can't get in the Soviet Union, and so what use will this be? And then 2 months later, there he is in Hungary, starting the Hare Krishna movement practically in the Soviet Union. So then it became clear that Krishna all along had a plan. Prabhupada was teaching Harikesh about defeating communist philosophy, but he had not mentioned how it should be utilized. And in fact, when he took sannyas in February of 76, he was told, go and join the Radha Damodar party. But Krishna had his plan. He got to London. Instead of going west, he went east. And that started the whole Eastern European preaching program, which went on for about 20 years. Anyway, so it was interesting that Prabhupada had trained him up, and then the very thing that he trained him up in was immediately needed. So Prabhupada replied, encouraging him to take the newly found opportunity to preach to the communists. He approved of his plans for mass kirtan and prasadam distribution, but he advised him to preach very tactfully in such places. He said that printing our books can wait. First of all, he said, let their hearts become cleansed by chanting Hare Krishna and taking Krishna prasadam. To take birth in such places, Eastern Europe, he said, is due to an impious past. So it's not easy for them to immediately accept our philosophy. So his advice was soften them up, give them some nice prasadam, let them chant. Gradually they get purified, then you can start talking about philosophy. So he ended up by advising him to work with Kirtiraj Prabhu. He was based in America, but he was from a Polish family. So he was in contact with some people in Poland. They were corresponding. So Prabhupada told Harikesh that you can work with Kirtiraj and, go into the Soviet Union. So that they actually did that. Kirtiraj told me that one of the strategies for distributing books in Eastern Europe was to go to the ports, and the ship ports in Sweden, because the Soviet ships would dock there. They had their agreements and disagreements, but one thing was that shipping-wise, the Russians were sending ships into Scandinavia. They would stay there for a few days and then go back, and they would trade whatever it was that they were selling. So Kirtiraj and a few others, whenever a boat came in from Russia, they would go to the docks and they would observe the sailors and then take them aside, and one by one they would give them a book, and then they would go back to their country with the Bhagavad Gita or whatever it was. And in that way it started to spread Krishna consciousness in Russia as well. So anyway, Prabhupada advised him to work with Kirtiraj to introduce the Sankirtan movement to Eastern Europe. So it was quite a almost miraculous, event. We simply didn't think that we could make any headway at all if we went to Russia and these places. They were so hard line. But Krishna obviously had his plan, and Prabhupada was the one that knew about it, so he passed that on to his disciples, and amazing things happened. You go there nowadays, every summer they have this summer camp for 1 week in Russia. They also have it in Ukraine, and there's like 8,000 or 10,000 devotees. Last time I went was a couple of years ago. They had about 8,000 devotees just from Ukraine, all there for 1 week having, chanting and workshops and whatever. So that was a good credit for Harikesh and Kirtiraj and so many others. But now we have such a presence in the Eastern Bloc countries. And of course now, because of the political collapse of the Soviet Union, we're able to travel freely, and we have no problems at all from the authorities. Because there's some places where we're not very welcome. Like my daughter, she goes on the Polish tour. They have a 2 or 3 month festival tour that goes from one town to another. But Poland, we had tremendous opposition when we first went there, because it was run by the Christians. Basically everybody's a Christian, and they really didn't like some foreign religion coming in, led by what they call devil worshippers and whatever ever. And so they didn't want us there, so they caused a lot of problems. So it wasn't just a political problem, there was still a religious problem. And still even now they go out of their way to create difficulties for us. But Indradyumna Maharaj has been running this program now for 25 years. So the Polish people themselves love it. They come in their thousands to see, drama and all these different aspects of yoga and what have you. So anyway, this was one of the first times that I heard Prabhupada speaking about Eastern Europe and the preaching, and that observation that actually they're ordinary people just like the people in the West are. So try to get through with prasadam and kirtan. So Washington DC, Prabhupada liked that, made that connection. So February the 1st, 1977, Prabhupada was in Bhubaneswar. He was taking walks in the morning, and he was talking about another report from Harikesh, how the Eastern European program is going on very nicely. He reported that they were having successes in many countries, such as Poland and Romania. People in these places, he said, are very agitated due to not having sufficient foodstuffs. And in Russia, he said subversive activities were going on, with some subways being blown up in Moscow and such things. So there was some revolution, little bit of revolution going on. So Prabhupada replied, he said, yes, the human intellect cannot be artificially suppressed for very long. He said, these things, no food, no rain, heavy taxation, they will be punished in this way. So Prabhupada was very pleased to hear the report, And he stressed on the chanting and prasadam distribution as the main program, and the philosophy could be given a little later on. So that's a bit of nectar about Eastern European preaching. So now the next section is about unauthorized and offensive chanting. So that, it became a bit of a problem. I think in some places it still is. The style of kirtan has changed a bit since Prabhupada started the movement. Prabhupada, when he started dancing and chanting with the devotees, he showed them a very simple way of dancing. You just put one foot forward and then back, the other forward and then back. So like that, back and forth, raise your arms up like we see Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. So that was Prabhupada's style. But as more people joined the movement, then by 74 or 75, the kirtans were really getting wild. And Prabhupada commented, one of the devotees, I think Rupanugari, asked Prabhupada when we were in New York, is this style of dancing bona fide, Prabhupada? So Prabhupada said, who has started this peculiar dancing? Yeah, he called it peculiar. But he didn't say to stop it. But one type of kirtan that he did stop, dead in its tracks, was this new style that somebody had developed where before they spoke the Maha Mantra, they would sing Bhaja Hare Krishna, or Bolo Hare Krishna. You hear it still. So this incident, August the 6th, 1976, Prabhupada was in New Mayapur. It was our last day there, and Prabhupada was installing Krishna and Balaram deities. So all the devotees from Europe came for that event. It was very nice. Prituputra Swami, the French sannyasi, he was there, and he was leading the kirtan. So Prabhupada was upstairs. His room was directly above the temple room. And he was sitting waiting to be called down to do the bathing ceremony, etc. And the devotees were having, a wampa stomper, very, really, heavy into it. So there was kirtan throughout the morning as the devotees prepared for the installation. Prabhupada was sitting quietly in his room, waiting to be called, when he suddenly rang the bell and asked me to get Harikesh. When he arrived, Prabhupada told him, "Listen, what is that?" So he was indicating the kirtan downstairs. He said, "He is adding something before the Hare Krishna mantra. You go down and stop it and bring him to me." So Harikesh wasn't sure exactly what Prabhupada was referring to, but he went straight downstairs, pushed his way through the packed temple room. Prituputra Swami was pounding on a drum and leading a loud and fervent rendition of the Maha Mantra. A group of sweat-soaked brahmacharis were gathered around him, clashing the karatals, stamping their feet, waving their hands, and leaning into an intense exchange of the holy names, with Prituputra leading them. So first he chanted, and then, every time he took the lead, he prefaced the Maha Mantra with the word Bhaja, chant. So that's what Prabhupada heard. So Harikesh butted in, stopped the kirtan, and brought the singing to an abrupt stop. He told Prituputra Maharaj that Prabhupada wants to see you. So he immediately, he didn't know what it was about, but if Prabhupada personally asked for you, it would, it might not be pleasant. So he came up the stairs to see Prabhupada. As soon as he entered Prabhupada's room, very apprehensively, wondering what was going on, Prabhupada, whose sharp ears had picked out the extra word, demanded to know where he had learnt this Bhaja Hare Krishna mantra. He was very angry. He said, "There's no Bhaja in Hare Krishna. Where did you get this from?" So, shaken by Prabhupada's sudden rebuke, Prituputra turned red. He said, "Well, I heard it in Vrindavan." So, that's probably not the right thing to say. Prabhupada's wrath immediately intensified. He heard it in Vrindavan. To Prabhupada, that meant it was coming in from the Babajis or these nonsense people. So Prabhupada's face flushed as he thought about his disciples once again becoming polluted by the non-ISKCON elements of Vrindavan. He exploded. Why are you taking this from the nonsense Babajis? Who has taught you this? A shocked Pritaputra tried to reassure him. He said, no, not from the Babajis. I heard it from our own men. So Prabhupada was still fuming, but he eased off a bit when he understood that it had not come from an outside source. Still, he strongly warned his disciple, you never chant this Bhaja Hare Krishna again. The Hare Krishna mantra is complete in itself and requires no additions. So, promising not to repeat his mistake, Pritaputra returned to the temple room to resume the chanting, this time without the additional. So it's one of Prabhupada's great fears that ISKCON devotees will become increasingly polluted by the outside influences who are not strictly in line with our Sampradaya's pure devotional principles. So just as he had done 2 months before with the so-called Gopi Bhava Club. So he said, he acted quickly and firmly at the very first sign of contamination. So that Gopi Bhava Club was the first Sahaja group to be spawned from ISKCON. It was mainly all the devotees that were working in the BBT. So they were getting the manuscripts, of course, before any other devotees. So I guess a few of them were a little bit, feeling privileged. They're a little bit puffed up. We've got, advanced information. So they, especially in 1974 and 5, when Prabhupada was translating the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So some of these devotees, they thought, this is confidential material, so it'd be exciting to read that. We'll be one step of everybody else. So they started to have special meetings where they would get together. The ladies had one group, the men had another group, and they would only discuss the Rasa Leela, nothing else. So the temple authorities tried to stop them, so they refused, and then they kind of went a little bit underground, and they were continuing on with their discussions, but in private. So when Prabhupada got to Los Angeles, Krishna Prabhu, he was friendly because he was Prabhupada's editor. He knew everybody in the BBT, so he knew what was going on. And I saw that practically the second morning that we were there, we brought Prabhupada's breakfast in and put it on his desk. Prabhupada came into the prasadam room and sat down. Then Prajumni came and he whispered something to Prabhupada. Prabhupada immediately put down his plate of prasadam, not the plate, but the prasadam, got up, went into his sitting room and demanded to know, now bring these people to me. So there was a whole exchange, I won't mention it now, but Prabhupada immediately clamped down on them. He disbanded the groups. He told them, you're not fit for this kind of discussion. He said, just because it's in my books doesn't mean that you can understand it properly and read it. He said, it's like going into a pharmacy. You have a disease, but there are many, many different kinds of medicines. Not every medicine will suit every disease. You have to get the proper medicine for that particular disease. So Prabhupada was very, very angry. He told us that this sahajarism, he directly called it sahajarism. He said, if this spreads, then he said all the preaching in ISKCON will be finished. Because he'd seen so many of his own godbrothers after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had left the planet. Many of them became Babajis and joined other, Babaji groups, so the whole thing fell apart. So Prabhupada was particularly, tuned into what the devotees were doing, just in case they also got affected by this nonsense. That was why when we first started, or when the Krishna Balaram temple was first inaugurated, then all the devotees were told, you cannot go to Radhakund, you can't go to Shyamakund, you stay here and run the programs that I've given you. Prabhupada told us this. You just run the programs that I've given you. You stay in our temple. You don't go to these other temples because you'll become polluted. So he was very, very concerned about that at all times. So it's one of Prabhupada's great fears that ISKCON devotees will become increasingly polluted by outside influences who are not strictly in line with our Sampradaya's pure devotional principles, just as he did with the Gopi Baba Club in Los Angeles. They got this nickname. The other devotees used to call them the Gopi Baba Club. So he acted quickly and firmly at the very first sign of any contamination. So that was the first time that I heard Prabhupada complain about this Bhaja Hare Krishna. So later on, in August, a month later, Ram Shraddha from Hyderabad, he was there at the temple. He was leading the kirtan. He picked up the Bolo Hare Krishna. He wasn't doing Bhaja Hare Krishna, but he was doing Bolo Hare Krishna. Prabhupada heard him, because his room kind of overlooked the temple room. And again, immediately he sent, it wasn't me, but he sent somebody else down, stop chanting this bogus mantra, just chant Hare Krishna. So that was the second time I saw Prabhupada deal with that. Then in October, early October, we were in Vrindavan. And one of the devotees from America, he was traveling around and he brought a cassette tape, a recording of some mantras that were being chanted by one of Prabhupada's godbrothers. It was a Kinchana Krishna Das Babaji, so nothing wrong there. But they were, hey, this is something new. We always like to, get something new, be one step ahead of everybody else. So he started singing this new version of Jaya Radha Madhava. And a couple of days before, this issue about chanting Hari Bol with Lokanath Maharaj's party, they'd gotten into another style of kirtan where they would just chant Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, back and forth. And sometimes they'd go on for 10 minutes just Hari Boling. So some devotees were disturbed by it. I brought it up to Srila Prabhupada. He spoke with Lokanath Maharaj. In fact, the day before we went to Vrindavan, at around Astami time, we were in Delhi, and we had a little pandal. Prabhupada came out, he sat down, they were having a kirtan. Lokanath Maharaj was, whooping it up with his newly made brahmacharis, and they were singing this, this Hari Bol, Hari Bol. And Prabhupada from the stage, without saying anything, he looked at Lokanath, he said, stop. And he didn't say why, but he told him stop. So then they reverted to chanting Hare Krishna. Now a few days later, we're in Vrindavan, and then this devotee comes from America, he's got this tape, and he's singing a different tune to Jaya Radha Madhava. So the regular one, of course, we know. But this Jaya Radha Madhava, Kunjabi Hari Gopi Jana Balabha, the other tune, alternative tune. So I heard that. I knew this devotee, Katha Prabhu. And so I called him over. I said, Prabhupada doesn't like this kind of chanting. You have to stop it. So he argued back, no, it's okay. So we couldn't agree. So I told him, all right, I'm going to ask Prabhupada and we'll settle it. So during the massage time, I brought it up with Srila Prabhupada about, the new Jaya Radha Madhava and also about Lokanath's party. And Prabhupada, agreed that actually it's not good. It's all right, he said. The Jaya Radha Madhava he approved of, just because it was, another tune, he said, but it doesn't matter, the words are there. But the chanting by Lokanath and then this Tranakata, he'd learned a few more bhajans that nobody in ISKCON knew. So Prabhupada was wary of that. He said, this is a problem. They're going out and getting so-called new things and chanting them. The chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra should be sufficient. That's all we need. We don't need these other things. So October the 6th then, as far as the new version of Jaya Radha Madhava is concerned, Prabhupada said that it was all right. But he added, Bhaja Hare Krishna is not all right. I didn't ask him, I never mentioned Bhaja Hare Krishna. So he said, this is all right, but he attacked on himself, this Bhaja Hare Krishna is not all right. So he was concerned about it. So he said, the thing is, they add these things without asking, and that is the danger. It is better to just follow the Guru. So, again, a month or two later, December the 9th, Prabhupada was in Hyderabad. We got that 560 acres of land from Hari Prasad Badruka. We had Prabhupada had just signed all the legal papers, handing it over to ISKCON, and then he went down for 2 weeks to Hyderabad, out to Medchow, and he was going to bring in something new. When we left Vrindavan to go down south, as Prabhupada was getting in his car, then he said, now we're going to start a new phase of this movement. Then he sat down, he didn't say anything more. So Jagadish was the secretary at that time. We were sitting in the car, and Prabhupada said a new phase, but he didn't tell us what it was. So Jagadish asked Prabhupada, well, what is that, Srila Prabhupada? He said, Varnashram. So that was Prabhupada's intention. He was going to come down to Hyderabad and then start this rural community and teach Varnashram. So anyway, we were there. We just got there. It was December the 9th. We were out on the farm. And again, Prabhupada took a walk, but it was a short one. So Prabhupada at that time was getting very sick. He had numerous illnesses, and he was just getting weaker and weaker. But he generally wouldn't take any medicine, and he would just rely on chanting. So he was taking morning walks, but very short, because he was very weak. So he saw in the middle of a field there was a banyan tree. So he immediately headed for that and sat under the branches for a while, whilst Hansadutta was leading kirtan. Then we returned to the farmhouse. So as we neared the buildings, Prabhupada stopped, and again he mentioned that you do not sing this Bhaja Hare Krishna, this Bhaja in front of that Mahamantra. So Ram Shraddha was one of the local brahmacharis. He's gotten in the habit of singing Bolo Hare Krishna, much to Prabhupada's disapproval. So that was the third time that Prabhupada brought this up of his own accord. We weren't singing Bhaja Hare Krishna, but Prabhupada stopped. He said, don't sing Bhaja Hare Krishna. So then the 5th time that it came up, that's with me, was at the Allahabad Kumbh Mela. So that was mid-January. Prabhupada had gone there, a lot of devotees had gone there. It was supposed to be an extra special Kumbh Mela, like it was in the cycle of 144 years. So this was supposed to be the 144th year. So there were millions and millions of people there, as you all know if you've been there. And Prabhupada again, he was very he was not healthy, he was very weak. It was very cold at the Kumbh Mela. And the first day that we got there, he had a look around the arrangements, and they had set up a separate section for Prabhupada's tent. We were all in tents. And when they showed that to Prabhupada, it was a tent with 3 partitions. But the problem was that it was a summer tent, not for winter. So when the wind blew, which it did every day, the ice cold wind would just blow straight through the tent because it was so thin. So anyway, we had no choice. We had to just cope with it. So in the middle of the night, on the first day there, Prabhupada rang his bell. Rameshwara by that time had become his visiting secretary, GBC secretary. He rang the bell, Prabhupada, and I went into the tent, his section of the tent, and there was just some flimsy flaps, for a doorway, and like a freezing cold wind was blowing straight through the tent. Prabhupada was sitting in the corner. He couldn't work because there was no electricity. That was another problem. And it was freezing cold. So he was sitting there with he had this winter coat. Remember, you've seen that in the pictures sometimes. It looks like fur. It's not fur, it's artificial. but one of the devotees had made him this nice warm coat, and we always travelled with that. So he had that coat on, and he had, a beanie on his head, and he had gloves, and he was just sitting and chanting because that's all he could do. So he wasn't very happy with the arrangements. But another irritation was that there was another group that were in the same area, just like the next pandal over 2 hours, and they were Mayavadis. So all night long they were going on about some personality called either Kabir or Gabir. He's from the 17th century. Apparently he had some following at one point. Anyway, let's say that it was Kabir. So Prabhupada had to listen to this Mayavadi chanting all night long, as well as all the other problems, so he really wasn't very happy. He had told the devotees that he would stay at the Kumbh Mela if it was going on successfully, and if our pandal, was packed out, then he would stay for at least 3 weeks and preach to the people at the pandal. So our men had put up the pandal, they made the area for residences with the tents, but not a single person came for the pandal in the evening because nobody could find us. The organisers had given us a block of land that was way, way away from the main stretch. There's a big viaduct railway at that crossing of the Ganges there. So it was just underneath the railways there. The railway itself is way up in the air. So Prabhupada told me the first day that we were there, he said, this is where my father was cremated actually, under that bridge. Anyway, so he wasn't very happy about the whole setup. It was, no preaching could be done practically. So Prabhupada only stayed for about 3 or 4 days, and he said there's no use staying here, we should go to Calcutta. So anyway, on the first day or second day, Prabhupada took a short walk, and when he came back within his little tent compound, the devotees followed, and then Prabhupada gave a short class. So again this morning, Prabhupada did not walk, and he had a Guru Puja and class in his tent. He talked about how all the Mayavadis are offenders. Why are they offenders, he asked? Because they simply make up their own process, and this is demonic. So in reference to a pandal next to ours, which had its speakers blaring all night long, it wasn't just chanting mantras, they had it full blast on the speakers. So Prabhupada said in regard to that pandal next to ours, its speakers blaring all night long, proclaiming the glories of somebody called Kabir. So Prabhupada said they're saying, Kabir says this, Kabir says that, but they'll never chant Hare Krishna. So the whole setup there wasn't very jolly. So at this point, Prabhupada took the opportunity to mention once again about the fad of chanting Bhaja Hare Krishna. So it was still going on, that some of our men have adopted, although nobody was doing it there at the Kumbh Mela. So Prabhupada condemned it as an invention, and he quoted this verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Mayavadi Bhashya Shrunile Hoy Sarvanasha. He said that just as the Mayavadis are inventing and others are singing Nitai Gaur Radhisham Japa Hare Krishna Hare Ram, so he said this should be stopped. So that was 5 times I heard Prabhupada tell the devotees, you can't chant Bhaja Hare Krishna or Bolo Hare Krishna. Just chant the Maha Mantra as it's given. It doesn't need any addition from any of you. So that was one incident. Now later on in 1977, of course, Prabhupada got very sick. Tamal Krishna Maharaj came on as his secretary. In mid-May, Prabhupada travelled. He'd been spending a week or so in Rishikesh, and he got really sick again. So he came back to Vrindavan. We thought that he was going to leave his body at that time, but somehow or another, his illness kind of subsided a little bit. So again, this issue of chanting Bhaja Hare Krishna was raised. So in ISKCON, right from the very beginning, we had been accustomed to chant Bhaja Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita. Prabhupada himself was singing that. You can hear the recordings. But in 77, there in Vrindavan, Prabhupada suddenly decided that we should not chant Bhaja anymore. So he told Tamal Krishna and a few of the sannyasis were there, he said that we had become accustomed to chanting Bhaja Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda. So Prabhupada suddenly decided to change it. He said, now you sing Sri Krishna, but not Bhaja. He said that should be stopped now. I don't think we got a clear instruction from Prabhupada. He never explained why he wanted to change it after chanting that for so long, why he wanted to change over. But, the charya is inconceivable. Something that Prabhupada himself had been doing, now he changed it. So from that time on, then we started chanting Bhaja Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda instead of what we'd originally done with the Bhaja. So that was another example. Prabhupada's concern for chanting properly. And again, from Tamal Krishna Goswami's diary on the 23rd of May, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. At 3 p.m., Prabhupada signed his will and had Upendra, Gopinath, who later on became Bhakti True Maharaj, and myself, means Tamal Krishna. They were the witnesses for Prabhupada's will. So during the kirtan, Prabhupada twice instructed Yashodananda Swami not to sing Bhaja before Sri Krishna Chaitanya. So Tamal asked a rhetorical question he put in his diary. Was it because of the bogus groups that were chanting this word first? Prabhupada said to just chant Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya. So twice in May of 1977, Prabhupada brought the issue up. The first instance was on May the 23rd. The second instance was on May the 29th. So, anyway, I was present in Prabhupada's room on the next occasion that he mentioned this 29th of May. So Prabhupada told us, I'm repeating this, you can say Sri Krishna Chaitanya or Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya, but never Bhaja. You should just glorify these 5 personalities and they will take care of everything. So that was Prabhupada's big concern, that things may not become spoiled by invention. Devotees have a tendency to do that. They do something for some time, then they get bored with it. They don't, get the spiritual insights, so they switch over and do something else. So Prabhupada said, this is your Western disease. And there was a little song that he sang a couple of times, at least when I was with him, that you stand on your hands and clap your feet, but do something new. So Prabhupada said this is the mentality, that we have to do something new, even if it means, clapping your feet and dancing on your hands. He said this is your Western disease, you always want to change everything. He said, whereas our process is that you keep everything the same. You don't change. Okay, so September the 17th, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, 1976. In class, Prabhupada spoke again in the morning about the tremendous power of mantra chanting. So I mentioned before, Prabhupada was speaking from the first canto, chapter 7, about Ashvatthama and Arjuna. So Prabhupada said, this mantra weapon is so strong that it can be manufactured simply by touching water and chanting some mantras. Just like we take the mantra, apavitro va, sarvavashtam, gatopi va, yasmaret pundarikaksham, sabhaya. So this same process, do not think that it is something ritualistic or external. No, it has got meaning. And if you can chant the mantra properly, if you follow all the rules, So you should become expert in chanting the mantra. So he gave the example of Haridas Thakur, who avoided the allurement of a beautiful prostitute by the strength of his advancement in chanting the mantra. So Prabhupada told us, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said, simply by chanting, you will get all the success of life. It is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's blessing, Iha haite sabasiddhi hoibe tama, that by simply chanting, one gets the highest perfection. So we should be very careful and follow the regulative principles, and automatically you'll become perfect. So yesterday in class, Prabhupada mentioned how the power of mantra had been verified by some doctors in Lucknow, but he didn't tell us anything more than that. So today he related the whole story. So he said, just like sometimes the snake charming mantra can be purchased in the marketplace, but if you do not make yourself perfect about chanting the mantra, it will not be effective. It's not just a question of having the mantra, but the person who's chanting it has to be pure, and then there'll be an effect. So, as he says, you can purchase the mantra in the marketplace. That's not difficult to do, but to get the effect from it, that's another thing. So he said, I'll give you one practical instance. It is not a story, it is a fact. If you have that Veda base, everybody's got that. If you do a search on it is not a story, it is a fact, you'll find many entries there. That was one of Prabhupada's little phrases. I'll tell you a story. It's not a story, it's actually a fact. So he said, just like sometimes the snake charming mantra can be purchased, but you have to be perfect about chanting, otherwise it won't be effective. So I'll give you one practical example. It is not a story, it is a fact. Perhaps some of you know my friend who came here, Dr. Ghosh. So he was an old friend from Prabhupada from Allahabad in the 1930s, and now and again he would come and see Prabhupada. He was a nice man. He was there right at the end when Prabhupada left us, and Prabhupada liked him a lot. He was a kind of a pious person, but he wasn't necessarily spiritual. Anyway, he had been at college, doing his studies. So that was at Lucknow University when he was a student there. So there is a big building, Prabhupada said, and 2 or 3 snake biting incidences happened. So some snake charmer was invited to find out that snake and take it away. So he came and he took away the snake. So then this Dr. Ghosh and his class friends, they were all medical students. So naturally the so-called modern scientists, they don't believe in all of these things. So they became very inquisitive. All of them went to the snake charmer. He was a Mohammedan man. And they asked him, so he knew these medical students, they've come to see the fun, how the snakes are being charmed. So they inquired, what is that magic that you can catch up the snake and the snake cannot do any harm to you? So Prabhupada told us, he said, that it is possible by mantra. So they challenged him, oh, your snakes, we think that they are poisonless, that you have taken, they cannot bite because you've removed the poison teeth. So he said, no, they've got everything. So he took one snake and he showed them here. And to make some fun, he had many snakes in a box. So he made all the snakes come out of the box. And all the students immediately were running here and there around the corridor because all the snakes had come out and they became afraid. So they were fleeing this side, that side. And so the charmer told them, he said, he was laughing, don't be afraid. As long as I am here, they will not bite you. So this was spoken to us by Dr. Ghosh. That was a practical experience. The mantra's got so much power. But not that you can purchase the mantra and chant. That will not act. You have to make it perfect. So there is a process how to become perfect in chanting the mantras. So this was just a material example, Prabhupada said. And if we seriously chanted the Maha Mantra, which is completely spiritual, then the effect will be unlimited. He said that if we chant it properly, even only once, the Hare Krishna mantra can destroy more sins than the most sinful person can commit in a whole lifetime. So nama paradi shunya. Without any nama parad, if we chant according to the principle, then the mantra will act so nicely that the mantra will keep you always in touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the power of the mantra. So don't think it as a hobby or see it as just something imagination. So if you're allowed to keep yourself constantly in company with Krishna, then just imagine what is your position. If you keep yourselves always near the fire, then certainly you shall remain warm. There will be no attack of cold or anything else. So if we constantly chant the Hare Krishna mantra, then we are not in this material world. But if we purposefully again come to the material world, well, that independence we've got. So the mantra is so powerful, it's more powerful than anything else, obviously, because it's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the sound of the holy name and the Lord himself are all the same. So Prabhupada, especially in Vrindavan, Prabhupada used to warn us about chanting properly. Otherwise, just as you can get 1,000 times the good effect, if you do nonsense, he said you get 1,000 times the sinful effect. So you're in the Dham, you have to be very, very careful and chant very nicely. So July the 1st, 1974, Prabhupada was in Melbourne, and at that time, I mentioned before, there was a group of devotees that split away from ISKCON, and they were being led by this Siddhaswarupananda Goswami. So they didn't like the strictures that they had to follow in the temple, so they split off and made their own arrangements. So many of them are based in Hawaii, New Zealand, and Australia. So the leader of the New Zealand group was a sannyasi named Tusta Krishna Swami. So in 1974, in July, Prabhupada had come to Melbourne, so Tusta Krishna Swami came there also to see Srila Prabhupada. So he was no longer wearing his sannyasi clothing, tilak, and shaved head. It was known that this group were also not strictly following the principles. They criticized ISKCON's leadership for emphasizing book distribution, which they claimed was disturbing the public. And for the same reason, they didn't dress as devotees. They claimed that the deity worship was for neophytes, and it was not necessary to live in a temple to become Krishna conscious. So in truth, life in a temple was too regulated, too demanding, and too strict for them. However, their abandonment of the sadhana of spiritual life was rationalized by them by their claims to be keen chanters of the holy name. And this was all that was sufficient for spiritual progress. So the idea was that as long as we chant Hare Krishna, we don't have to do anything else. We don't have to follow any principles. We don't have to live in a temple. We don't have to go to the artis or anything. Just chant Hare Krishna, because that's the most powerful I forgot the word. Anyway, that's the most powerful thing that they can do. So anyway, this sannyasi came to Prabhupada. He'd given up his sannyas clothing, stopped shaving his head, etc. So Prabhupada was not happy to see his sannyasi disciple minimize the value of the standard practices of devotional service. And after using the analogy of trying to light a fire using wet wood, Prabhupada told him a story. So first of all, he told him, you're chanting, what's the use of it? If you're not following properly, it's like pouring water on, and trying to start a fire, but then pouring water on it at the same time. So that was one line Prabhupada took. And then Prabhupada told him another story. He said, so pure devotional service is like a flame. All other things are smoke. So you must get the flame, otherwise your business will not get done. So naturally, we fan when there is some smoke. Poof, 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 poof. And as soon as the flame comes, then there's no more smoke. So again, fan it. Let the flame come. Then again, everything will be all right. So otherwise, you'd be satisfied with the smoke only. You were cooking with smoke for 300 years. So he said there's a very humorous story. One man, he was a yogi, so he approached. So it's not a story, it's a fact. He was approached by one big man. So some rich man, he had approached this yogi. So people are very inquisitive to see some yogic magic. So the rich man asked this yogi, what you have learned about the yogic perfection. So the man said, no, I can stand in the severe winter season. I can dip myself in the water up to my neck and practice yoga, even in the freezing cold of the river. So the man said, all right, so how long can you remain? All night? Yes, I can remain the whole night or as long as you want me to. So the man told him, all right, if you can remain within the severe cold, within the water overnight, then I'll give you some presentation. So it's kind of like a bet. And so the yogi agreed, and he actually did it. He spent the whole night in the freezing cold water. And in the morning, when he came out, he went to see the man. So the fellow asked him, oh, you were successful? So he said, yes. So anyway, the man actually didn't want to give the yogi anything. So he was trying to figure out how he could avoid giving him his prize. So he had one advisor. So he asked him, what shall I do? So the advisor told him, no, sir, you cannot give him any money. So why? So now there was some heat. So how was there some heat? So he was making the claim, although he was in the water, he had some source that was supplying heat to him and then enabled him to stay in the cold. So Prabhupada said, you know that in India they give this Akash Pradeep during the Kartik month. So this is our Vaishnava principle, that they put a lamp on the head of the roof of the temple. So, of course, not an electric lamp, an actual fire lamp. So this is, so on the roof there is a bamboo, and on the top of the bamboo there is a light put. So this man, this advisor, he was telling the rich man that on the roof there is this bamboo, and on top of the bamboo there is light. So this man, he was in the lake, and when he said, you have seen the lamp on the top of the temple, so he was taking heat from that. And the lamp's way up in the air. This guy's in the water. No, he's cheating. He's getting the heat somewhere or another from this lamp. So he said, you cannot give him any money. So the lamp was 3 miles away, and still he advised, yes, there was heat. So therefore he could tolerate. So what can be said? He was a poor man. So there was another servant of the same man. So he didn't like it, what the advisor had said. So he appealed to the man that I took so much the yogi appealed to this man that, see, I took so much trouble and he didn't pay me anything. So the other servant, he said, don't worry, I'll see that you get paid. So then that servant, whilst he was employed, there was some urgent business. So the rich man told him, tomorrow I have to go to such and such a place and you must come with me. So suppose he was to go at 10 o'clock. So the rich man, he was waiting and waiting, but the rice that they were going to have for breakfast wasn't coming. So he kept asking him, are you ready? Or he sent a message down to the kitchen, are you ready yet? And the message would come back, no, just now I am cooking. Then I shall finish my cooking, take my meals, and then we shall go. So he was very angry. So he said, why did you not tell me? He said, no, I'm cooking. So where are you cooking? So he took him to the kitchen. He had 3 bamboo poles. So they were kind of like a triangle. And on the top he'd put a pot, rice pot, and he was giving some fire down here. So the pot's up here, the fire's down on the ground. So he showed him, this I'm cooking. So the man got very angry. He said, how can you do this? You're such a nonsense. So the man told him, he said, if the temperature from the lamp on the roof of the sky could protect that yogi, then why will it not cook my food? So in this way, the rich man, he understood that he'd made a mistake. He cheated the yogi. So after that, the yogi was called and given some prize. So Prabhupada told this sannyasi, he said, so this kind of progress, cooking 3 miles above a pot and a little fire, that will not act. There must be proper adjustment for the cooking. Then you can cook food and eat it. So a little smoke or a little fire 3 miles away, the cooking pot, in this way, your cooking is a useless attempt. So he was, telling him about his chanting. You claim that you're just chanting all the time, but your chanting is like this person cooking 3 miles away, and you'll never get any result from that. So he said there's a method how to cook. If you don't adopt that method, and if you cook on your own whimsical way, you will never be able to get it eatable. So if you say, I shall cook in my own way, and you adopt that process, will it help? Na siddhim sa avapnoti sa sukham na param. So as a result of this meeting, Tusta Krishna Swami again adopted his sannyas attire, and under Prabhupada's direction began the construction of a temple on their farm in New Zealand, and they also formed a book distribution party. So they drifted away. Prabhupada was trying to bring them back, so he told them that story. It was very instructive. So for some time, this fellow did, again adopt his sannyas dress, but as soon as Prabhupada left the planet, of course, then they immediately split from, really split from ISKCON, and they just adopted their ordinary kami clothes again and dropped all the standards. They're still going on. They have some place on the Australian East Coast. I think they've got some place in Hawaii. So he has some following, but they don't follow the principles. They're not actually, Prabhupada told me personally, he said, they are not in our line. Yeah, they're not in our line, although they chant Hare Krishna, because they don't follow the standards given by the Guru. Therefore, they're not actually part of our Sampradaya. Okay, so after being in Melbourne, that was in 74, because Prabhupada used to come every year to Australia for 1 week. So this issue came up again. Prabhupada had been in Australia, and then he flew to Auckland in New Zealand. So Tusta Krishna Swami was there with their people, and we had just a very small yatra at that time. There were probably about 5 or 6 ISKCON devotees there, whereas Tusta Krishna's following was in the hundreds. Sometimes on a Saturday night, they go down the main street of Auckland chanting Hare Krishna. So on one side of the road, our devotees were there, 5 or 6 of them. Across the road, directly across the road, Tusta Krishna Swami was there with all of his followers, about 100 people. So we were a little outnumbered there. But somehow or another, eventually their whole program fell apart. Ours is still going on. Now we have a beautiful 100-acre property and a big temple and so many things. Anyway, when Prabhupada arrived in Auckland, this was on April the 27th, 1976. So he'd just come from Melbourne. So to meet him, Tusta Krishna Swami was there, and he was telling him some of the events of their preaching in New Zealand. So apparently some local city officials are trying to ban the devotees from chanting in the street. The reporter mentioned this, and Tusta Krishna confirmed that there had indeed been some publicity in 1 or 2 other cities. Some of it was favourable and some of it was unfavourable. So Prabhupada was pleased, because he said even if there is agitation against chanting, that is also good. Even if they say that Hare Krishna is bad, saying that is good. So at least they will have chanted Hare Krishna. So people who chant you Hare Krishna, so that we should be happy because they're chanting the mantra. So Prabhupada always took the bright side of things, let's say. So Prabhupada told the devotees that they will become triumphant if they continue to chant and distribute books. But he cautioned them as well. He said they think that this Hare Krishna movement is disturbing, so a rascal civilization. So let us try our best, what can be done. You were also helping in this movement, this was to Tushta Krishna. So don't spoil the movement by manufacturing ideas. Don't do that. You go on in the standard way, keep yourself pure. Then the movement is sure to be successful. But if you want to spoil it by being whimsical, then what can be done? It will be spoiled. If you manufacture whimsically and disagree and fight amongst yourselves, then that will be just another edition of some so-called movement. It will lose the spiritual strength. Always remember it. Don't make an ordinary musical vibration. It is a different thing. It is spiritual. So the mantra is not an ordinary sound vibration. We have to keep the mantra in potency by offenseless chanting, by remaining pure. If you pollute the mantra, then it will lose its effect. So it's not just even a question of chanting the mantra, because Bhaktivedanta Thakur also criticized these bogus groups, that their chanting is simply alphabets. Yeah, that means that it looks like, but actually it has no potency. It's just some learning some alphabet and singing that. So, quote it down just a little bit more. All right, so I mentioned Katha Prabhu, he came to Vrindavan singing different songs. So actually that tape that he brought to Vrindavan and Prabhupada's godbrother chanting some mantras, we first heard about that when Prabhupada was in Delhi in August of 1976. Oh no, sorry, that's the wrong paradigm. Let me backtrack on that one. This particular occasion, August the 30th, it was Prabhupada and the devotees were celebrating Radharani's appearance day. So we were there in we'd gotten a new temple in Delhi, not a new building, but we'd moved out of the old one, we got a bigger place. So Prabhupada was happy to go there for the Radhastami celebration. So we were sitting on the small stage. Lokanath Maharaj and his men were in exuberant kirtan. So after singing the standard prayers and the Maha Mantra, Lokanath began chanting, Gaur Nityananda Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaur Sri Advaita Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaur Sri Gadara Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. You've all heard that one? So they were putting a lot of emphasis on the response of Hari Bol, Hari Bol. And they were going on and on. And Prabhupada was sitting there. Prabhupada suddenly signaled Lokanath from the stage, stop it. He didn't say it, but he just signaled. Lokanath immediately knew why, so he stopped. But we didn't know exactly what Prabhupada's objection was. We knew that he didn't like us to sing like that. So we left there, we went to Vrindavan. September the 6th, we've been there a couple of days. After the temple darshan in the evening, there is always a big kirtan during the arati, especially with Lokanath Maharaj and his men here. They're all extremely enthusiastic chanters. However, they've developed this style of kirtan that is a bit different from the ISKCON normal. When the kirtan reaches its climax, they gather around each other in a group and they start singing Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, 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 Hari Bol. So they bounce it back and forth between they split into two groups and they just sing Hari Bol. So sometimes they went on for 5 or 10 minutes singing back and forth. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Sometimes it goes on even longer than the chanting of the Maha Mantra. Some devotees are not happy about it, although no one can fault their enthusiasm. Harikesh Swami objects to it quite strongly, and this evening he went into Prabhupada's garden at the back of his house to complain to Srila Prabhupada, or at least to get some opinion from Prabhupada about it. So since we had never heard Prabhupada sing this mantra, Harikesh had doubts as to whether it was actually a bona fide practice. Prabhupada had stopped Lokanath's Kirtan at the Pandal in Delhi, but at that time he had not given us the reason why. So now this evening, Prabhupada, although not too upset by it, he made it clear that such chanting was not approved by him. He told us that we should mainly chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. He said, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, it's all right, because they are bona fide names of the Lord. But the real point is that we should strictly follow only what the Acharyas have given us. This is the process. He said that the Acharyas, they only chanted all 5 names of the Panchatattva, not just 2. So although there was no offense in chanting the names of Gaur Nitai, if we deviate and chant our own made-up mantras, then this is called Guru Ravagya, or disobeying the orders of the spiritual master and the line of Acharyas. So if you invent something, even if it's, the actual holy names, but if you invent some way of chanting it that's not been given by the Acharyas, then it's actually Guru Ravagya. So although there is no offense in chanting the names of Gaur Nitai, if we deviate and chant our own made-up mantras, this is Guru Ravagya, or disobeying the orders of the spiritual master. So to advance in spiritual life, Prabhupada told us we must always follow the line of Acharyas. He referred to the ashram at the back of our Krishna Balaram Mandir. So in that temple where they sing every day, Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam Japa Hare Krishna Hare Ram. So Prabhupada said this is an offense because it's a deviation from the line of Acharyas. So their meaning, actually these people that chant that mantra, what they say is that Nitai Gaur is Radhe Shyam. Because we know, from the Shastras, Nitai means Nityananda, Gaur is Lord Chaitanya. These people, they sing Nitai Gaur Radhe Shyam, Japa Hare Krishna Hare Ram. So they equate Nitai Gaur with Krishna and Radharani, so therefore it's an offense. So other devotees were also present in the garden as we talked. Charanarvindam from England has discovered that his service as Prabhupada's gardener gives him free access and the ability to be present whenever Prabhupada is there. So when Prabhupada was on tour in America in the summer, Charanarvindam had taken it upon himself to make a nice garden for Srila Prabhupada at the back of his house. So there was a small grassy area, so he had it all dug up and dug a pit, and then he made like a fountain. So he put this fountain in, and then the water was made to flow upwards. He'd gotten a little figure with 4 heads. It looked like Lord Brahma. It was about this big. And he made the pipe go up in the middle of that, put that on the top. When you started the fountain, then the water would shoot out from Lord Brahma's head. And he had also repainted it in hot pink. So it was supposed to be like a saffron colour, but it was actually came out like hot pink. So it was a bit gaudy. And the temple president and Harikesh, of course, he was on the party. When they saw that, they were a bit doubtful whether Prabhupada would like it. So when Prabhupada came and he walked out into the garden, he said, "Oh, this is very nice." And made a seat against the back wall and put some cotton down for Prabhupada. And practically every evening he would go in the garden, chant some japa, or if there was some visitor, they would go and see him there and discuss. So Charanarvindam, Prabhupada was pleased with his service. He made this nice back garden, so he was there every night also. And because one thing Prabhupada mentioned, I was there, Charanarvindam was from England also, we're both English. So Prabhupada was laughing, he said that, now we have an Englishman who's serving an Indian. He said, in my day that you could never have had that, yeah. But he was very happy that he was an Indian, and now he had two of the, British Raj remnants. They were serving him. So Prabhupada doesn't mind at all. Another devotee was Swayambhu Das. He was from Australia, and we were also joined by Vipramukha Das. He was one of the pujaris. So they had come to seek Prabhupada's blessings because he's setting out tomorrow, this devotee, to open up a center in Turkey. So there was a small group gathered in Prabhupada's back garden, and they were chit-chatting about what he should do when he went to Turkey. So Prabhupada's lotus feet, we were sitting at Prabhupada's lotus feet in a very congenial atmosphere, which was cooled and soothed by the sound of water gently flowing from the lotus fountain and the nectarian words gently flowing from Srila Prabhupada's lotus lips. So it was nice. Swayambhu wanted more clarification about something Prabhupada had said about the chanting of Nitai Gaur being a deviation. In his mind, there was some contradiction, and so he put it to Srila Prabhupada to resolve. He said, Prabhupada, you wrote in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the Chaitanya Mahamantra, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, that there is no offense in chanting that. And so therefore in the Kali Yuga it is actually more beneficial. So Prabhupada repeated some comments that he had made to Harikesh. He said the offense is that what is spoken by the acharyas, if you do not follow it, that is an offense. Guru Ravagya. To chant Gaur-Nitai, there's no offense. But if our previous gurus have chanted Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita, then why should we go beyond that? That is Guru Ravagya. Even if there is no aparad, but because the Guru, Kaviraj Goswami, has sung like that, and my Guru, he has also sung like that, so we should follow them. We should not make any deviation, not make this Guru Ravagya. Shruti Shastra Nindanam Namno Baladhyashahi Papi Buddhi. So it becomes one of the items of the Dasavidya aparad, or the 10 offenses in chanting the holy name. So, Guru Ravagya. Is it more beneficial for people? Swayambhu then asked him, is it more beneficial for people to hear the Panchatattva mantra than the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra? And Prabhupada said, yes. More beneficial because they're more merciful. So, let me see, I lost my page. So Prabhupada again repeated, we should not make any deviation, this Guru Ravagya. So he said, you're going to Hare Krishna through Nitai Gaur. Nitaya Karuna Habe Brajay Radha Krishna Pave. But Prabhupada added that the principle is, don't try to manufacture, because you are not experienced. So what nonsense you will manufacture, that will be offensive. It's better to go on with the simple thing. So Swayambhu said that he knew somebody who was chanting the Maha Mantra, the Panchatattva mantra, on his beads. So Prabhupada looked up, he said, who? He was surprised. So Swayambhu told him there's this boy called Richard that lives in Radhakund. There was a New York fellow. He was actually a nice guy, but he just went to Radhakund and he was sitting there chanting. So he'd adopted this, doing japa using the Panchatattva mantra. So it was a bit controversial, and Prabhupada shook his head in disapproval and sympathy. Rascal, he said, that is his bad association. Therefore I say, don't follow these so-called Radhakund Babajis. Narakakund Babaji, and they smoke beedis, I have seen. So Richard is still there. Prabhupada invited him, he was sympathetic. He was as skinny as a rail, this guy had been sick, and You know, he was on his own, so Prabhupada actually invited him to come and stay in our temple. But for some reason or another he couldn't do it. Later on we heard that he'd gone back to New York. So anyway, that's an important thing, that even if it sounds like a proper mantra, if it's not given by the Guru or the Parampara, then it's Guru Ravagya. So it's not exactly an apparat, but it's actually still offensive in somehow. Okay, so I'm going to stop at this point. It's getting a little late and my voice is starting to crack up. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
What part of chanting to take his name at the end of Kirtan?
Yeah, that's coming up. Prabhu was just asking, what about if we chant the names of the deities? So tomorrow we'll I'll keep you in suspense. Any other questions? Yes, Prabhu.
So we now in ISKCON we sing Hari Bol, and then all devotees they repeat Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. So this is going on. So we just read that the addition of Nitai Gaura is Guru Ravagya. So what's the?
Yeah, well, you know, it's like the Nitai Gaur Radhishan people. We had a conversation about that in Fiji in '76. Prabhupada was passing through there. And one afternoon, Guru Kripa Maharaj started asking questions about this group. And Prabhupada explained that, you know, because they take Nitai Gaur as being Radhishan, then it's an offense. So he said, although they're chanting Nitai Gaur, that's good, because Nitai Gaur are always merciful, so they'll always get some benefit from that. But because they're making an offense in comparing them to Radha Krishna, therefore whatever progress they can make is stunted, it's not bona fide, so they'll get some reaction for that. So that's the idea, that chant purely, you'll get a tremendous amount of advancement, but if you concoct things, even if it's, you know, the actual names of the Lord and His associates, it's not actually bona fide. So we have to be careful not to invent. That was one thing that Prabhupada was always concerned about, that we invent things. We're not satisfied with what we're given, and we want to do something new. So stand on your hands, clap your feet, and do something new. That's the disease. Okay, any other questions? No? All right, yes, Prabhu.
Regarding chanting, we see that devotees practice one kind of preaching, that they give japamalas immediately to people to take up chanting as soon as they visit first time to let it be known as a devotee public. So what was like Prabhupada, we see that he was just preaching them, and he was not. Was he also giving japamalas in the first visit, or he was just encouraging people to come here?
Well, it's a good question. I remember in the early days in Australia, I haven't been able to find the actual reference, but some information came to us that Prabhupada had been informed that new people, as soon as they come in, they're given some japamala and told how to chant. And Prabhupada apparently had replied that this is not correct. So until they get a little purified, you should not give them japamala. So whether that, you know, because the context of that may have been in the Western countries, it may not apply here in India, because people are accustomed, they know something at least about chanting or about deity worship, etc. But in the West, Prabhupada told us that don't give japamala immediately. Let them come, get purified, as he says, chanting and dancing. Then when they're a little ready to understand the philosophy, then you can. So, good question. All right, we're going to finish. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
His Grace Sauri Prabhu ki jai.